fifth and final message, which I've called Sorry Even. Sorry Even. The basic idea behind today's message as we close off this series is very simple. Intent is irrelevant. Intent is irrelevant. What am I talking about? What I'm talking about is whenever we use our words, whenever we weaponize our words, whenever we activate and deploy our words into battle, even though we may say, I didn't mean it, or my intent wasn't to do such, at the end of the day, when the damage is caused, when the pain has been inflicted, when we've done the thing that we've done or said the thing we should have said, oftentimes intent is irrelevant. Now, I don't know about you, but maybe this is true of all of us human beings. Whenever something gets past our lips, whenever something comes out of our mouths that we know as we're saying it, man, I'm going to regret this. And we can see in the other person's face the shock, the horror, the pain that comes with them receiving what we said. When the first things we think and the first things we say is, it was an accident. It was an accident. As if to say, oh, I didn't really intend for these words to come out. Therefore, don't be hurt. Don't feel pain. Don't allow what I'm saying to affect you, because in the day, it was an accident. True story, when I was like 12 years old, my parents went out and they left us with a babysitter. And I have many, many babysitting stories. I was every babysitter's worst nightmare. Nowadays, when someone comes to babysit my kids, it's like, you're not babysitting, because all my kids are asleep. You're just sitting, watching TV, eating my food, and getting paid for it. But back in the day, when babysitting actually involved work, anybody with me? Like, you know, where the babysitter was expected to wash up dishes after dinner, when the babysitter was expected to put the kids to bed, back in those days, way, way, way back in the past, when I was a wee lad that was 12 years old, I was driving my babysitter absolutely mad. I was just found a way to get under her skin. I was just driving her mad to the point where this huge row, and she chased me, and I never forget, for every reason, I grabbed a sweeping brush, ran down to my room, and as she tried to run into the room, I stuck the sweeping brush at the door so she couldn't get in. And so she's banging the door, banging the door, banging the door, and I'm calling her names, and I'm kind of winding her up, and I'm finding a way to irritate her further. Eventually, she kicks in the door, the brush hits my jaw, and dislocates my jaw. I was 12 years old. Now, can you imagine if you're a babysitter, or better, if you're a parent, getting a phone call saying, listen, I'm so sorry, I may have dislocated your son's jaw with a sweeping brush. Well, when my parents came home, she was like, it's an accident. It was totally unintended. And my parents were all like, oh, it's an accident. Oh, I see. Don't worry about it. There's no need to go to the hospital. There's no need to x-ray his jaw, even though it's open and to the side. Because it was an accident, therefore no damage caused, right? Wrong. I had to go to hospital, get x-rays done, and the doctor, perhaps one of the most painful things ever to experience, is a doctor popping your jaw back into place. What's the lesson? Just because something wasn't intentional doesn't mean it doesn't hurt. Just because something wasn't intentional doesn't mean it doesn't cause damage. The truth is, when it comes to ourselves, when it comes to us being the recipients of negative, hurtful, or harmful words, we are often quick to recognize how the words of others affect us, right? Come on, we know. We're already, our brain's already firing and processing as the words have been said. We're quick to recognize how the words of others affect us, but we are slow to take responsibility for how our words affect others. Bottom line is broken regardless of intent. Broken is broken regardless of it. It may have been an accident or accidental, but at the end of the day, when the damage is done, the damage is done. And oftentimes what we do, when we realize what we've said, how we've reacted, how we've come across, when we realize it's hurtful or harmful, damaging, oftentimes our first port of call, our first reaction is to begin explaining. Oh, you know, I didn't mean it, da, da, da. And what we realize is that we think by explaining, somehow we're going to repair. But just because this babysitter could explain the context, and even though really and truly I was in the wrong, because I kind of deserved it, to be honest with you, because of my cheeky behavior, at the end of the day, explaining didn't repair. Her explaining wasn't repairing my jaw. Her explaining things did not equal all of a sudden I was fixed and I was made well. Come on, what do we often say when we instantly begin to realize what we've said is hurtful? We say things like, I was only joking. Sure, I was only joking. Or we say, that didn't come out right. Or we say, I didn't want to hurt you. Or the best one is, I didn't mean it. It was accidental. I didn't mean what I said. But come on, let's be real for a second. Let's be real on this last Sunday of this series. The truth is, yes, you did. Because if you didn't mean it, you wouldn't have said it. If I didn't mean it, I wouldn't have said it. Bottom line is, mean people say mean things. That's challenging because we don't like to think of ourselves as mean people. We like to say, you know what, I'm a nice person who every now and again gets it wrong and should be forgiven for that wrong. But when other people are not nice to me, I label them as being bad, even though they might be wrong in that instance. In our mind, we judge them. As someone said, we judge ourselves by our intentions and others by their actions. We judge ourselves by our intentions, but others by their actions. What could happen in the world if we were to apply the same measure of judgment that we use against ourselves for others? What if rather than judging someone immediately by their actions, we asked ourselves the question, I wonder what's really going on there? Did they mean to cut me off in traffic? Maybe they're blind in one eye. Maybe they're blind in both eyes. Maybe they're just blind full stop. Like, we start to think about, maybe it isn't as bad as it seems. Maybe something's going on inside of them. But the bottom line is, we don't like to know this, we don't like to hear this, we don't like to be confronted with this fact. But when we're mean, we say mean things. And words, as we've learned through this series, are weapons. And words are weapons because words are weighty. If I took a little tiny pebble and threw it at you right now, it probably wouldn't even hurt you. Like it would just hit you and fall off, you wouldn't even feel it. But if I took a big rock and hit you straight in the face, it's gonna hurt, right? Why? Because it's heavy. And even though words are nothing more than air, the contortions of our tongue in our mouth with air, at the end of the day, words are incredibly powerful because words are weighty. And when it comes to our explaining, explaining is not repairing. I'll tell you what explaining is. Explaining isn't repairing, but explaining is blaming. Because what happens when we find ourselves explaining our way out of responsibility, explaining our way out of the fact that what we said should have been said and was hurtful and harmful and damaging? It puts pressure and expectation on the other person. Even though I'm in the wrong, I'm the one that said it. I'm the one that shouldn't have said what I said. When I begin explaining, if you don't agree or accept my explanation, then all of a sudden somehow the tables have turned and now you're in the wrong. We say things like, I said I'm sorry, which actually means, why are you not fixed? This is how it works. I said a grotesquely selfish, evil, mean thing to you, which is incredibly hurtful and damaging. But then I said I'm sorry. So what's wrong with you? Like, you're supposed to be fixed. You're supposed to forgive me. You're supposed to hug me. You're supposed to understand how I feel. But how incredibly selfish is this? When we're the ones who said what should have been said, when we're the ones that have done the damage, that all of a sudden we demand from the other party a level of behavior that tries to let us off the hook. Explanation. When we find ourselves trying to explain ourselves out of what we said, an explanation is nothing more than an excuse. Our explaining is actually excusing. We are so quick to recognize the impact of other people's words on us, but so slow to take responsibility for how our words affect others. And this is just, if you're here today and you're not a Jesus follower, this is just good advice for life in general. But if you're in this room and you are a Jesus follower, this is who we're called to be. We're called to be a people, yes, not perfect, as we're going to see in a second when we turn to our text, but we're called at least to endeavor, to aspire, to aim to be in the world a community of people who are characterized and marked by love. And love is not just something we feel in our hearts. Love is an action. Love is service, but love is also verbal. We speak the truth in love. We don't try to explain our way out of responsibility, and we don't try to excuse ourselves when we get it wrong and mess up. So the question then is, well, what do we do? The question is, so what do mean people not do? when saying sorry. If mean people say sorry and try to explain and excuse themselves out of responsibility, then what's the opposite? What should kind, loving, gracious people, what should people who are Jesus followers, how should we be different when it comes to saying sorry? And what we're going to do is we're going to turn to God's Word, as we do every week. Today we're going to look at the book of James, chapter 3, and we're going to look at verses 2 to verse 6. The book of James is way at the back of the New Testament. And what's so interesting about the book of James is this is actually James, the brother of Jesus. Which, think of this, James, his entire life, did not believe, we're told that James did not believe in Jesus' own claim that he was the Son of God and Savior of the world. Okay, he's like, you're my brother. Like, we grew up together. Used to get me in a headlock and give me nookies. Like, there's no way that you're God in a bod, right? Until, of course, we're told, when Jesus rose from the dead, all of a sudden, even James was like, okay, I may have gotten this wrong. And James, the brother of Jesus, became a follower, a believer in the lordship of Jesus after his resurrection. Here's my question to you. What would your brother have to do to you to convince you that he was the Son of God and Savior of the world? Thinking, probably die. I'd have to physically see him die and rise again for that to even be a possibility. So convinced was James of Jesus' identity that shortly after the book of Acts was written, James was killed. He was killed. We're told he was dragged outside the walls of Jerusalem and he was stoned to death because here was his confession. Jesus is more than just a brother, a rabbi, a teacher, philanthropist, philosopher, religious icon. He is the Son of God and Savior of the world. And I witnessed with my own eyes my brother die on a cross, be buried, and rise again. Perhaps James' testimony is one of the strongest testimonies we have in the New Testament of the validity of Jesus' identity and his position as Savior of the world. But in chapter 3, James, writing to the church, says this. He says, we all stumble. We all stumble. Here's the bottom line. Doesn't matter if you're Jesus follower, non-Jesus follower, every one of us has this one thing in common. We all stumble. And we stumble, he says, in many ways. There's so many struggles, so many challenges, so many ways and places and forms and shapes for how we screw up in life. And oftentimes, when people say outside the church, one of the reasons why I can't embrace the Christian message is because the church is full of hypocrites. It's like on the one hand, I get what they're saying, that, when the church does wrong, in fact, this message could be a manifesto for the organized church in the world, that sometimes what we got to do is own our nonsense and say sorry. That's true. But however, on the other hand, what I think is, well, of course the church is full of hypocrites. That's why we need Jesus. We need God because we can't be perfect in our own strength. We need God because we all stumble in many ways. This is the human condition. This is the thing that we all have in common regardless of our faith position. James continues, anyone who is never at fault in what he says is perfect, able to keep their whole body in check. Notice, what he's saying is that there's many ways we stumble, many ways we struggle, many things that are difficult. But if we can win the battle of our words, if we can win the war of our mouths, if we can get in control of this thing and what comes out of it, it is, if we can win that battle, we can win a lot of other battles. In other words, control of our mouths is what matters most. Control of our mouths is the highest level of self-control. There's many different ways self-control applies to the world, but perhaps the most difficult thing to control is our mouths. And if somehow we can win the war of the mouth, in some ways we can win the war of the world. James continues with a metaphor now. He says, when we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Now again, his audience, primarily first century audience, well, exclusively first century audience in the first instance. And so people would have, the primary mode of transport outside walking would have been donkey or horseback. And we may not understand the concept fully, but we all can get the idea, having watched movies or watched racing on TV, whatever, that, a horse is a massive animal. Have you ever ridden a horse or stood near a horse? Like, they're incredibly impressive strong and also gentle animals. I remember a couple of years ago, we were at an event over in Mayo, and part of the training thing was that we were all going to go trekking on horseback, which meant we were going to get in a horse and go up all these different mountain trails and do this whole loop. And I was amazed at how intelligent and strong and careful and strategic these animals are. They're just incredibly impressive animals. But despite their size, their stature, their strength, their majesty in a sense, a horse is controlled by putting a tiny bit in his mouth that allows the rider to manipulate the direction of the horse according to which direction they want to go. And then continues in verse 4. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, watch this, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. So again, in the same instance, think about a huge tanker or a huge cruise ship or any boat in particular, like this huge thing where it's driven by wind power back in the day, sails, or by engine power today. Still, what determines the direction of that ship is actually a very small piece of equipment called a rudder. What's James' point? What he's saying is when it comes to words, words are not simply a matter of diction. Words are not a matter of pronunciation or articulation or even communication. Words are a matter of direction. What we're saying and how we're saying it and what we're choosing to allow out of our mouths is actually helping to shape the direction of our lives. As we often say around here, our words shape our world. You go, well, how does that make sense? Well, for example, let's just say that you are in a relationship and you're hoping to convince that person you're with to marry you. What happens if you start to verbally mistreat that person? What happens if you start to verbally demean them, dishonor them, and disgrace them with your words? Well, the bottom line is that person is not going to be in your future, right? They're going to eject themselves from your story because they're going to realize that you are a mean person. In that instance, your words have shaped a future that you may not have even wanted. Whereas, if we can learn to speak with kindness, love, affection, and humility, then that builds a different future. Which, by the way, if that analogy is true before marriage, let me just speak to all the married couples for a second. Why is it not true of marriage? Why is it that just because we think we've been married and are married that we can verbally mistreat each other and speak to each other, over each other, and about each other in a way that is demeaning, degrading, dishonoring, and disgracing? Our words, not just for our marriage, but for our families, are shaping our future. Our children don't do what we tell them to do, they do what we do. And if we want to build our kids up to live and create a better world, then we do it with our words, because our words are not simply a matter of diction, but a matter of direction. Likewise, James says in verse 5, the tongue. Likewise, the tongue, like a small bit, like a rudder, the tongue is like one of those things. It is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. It seems like all over the world at any given time, whether it be California or the Amazon, or last year, that incredibly tragic fire in Hawaii, wherever, there's always somewhere in the world it's burning. And oftentimes what happens is when they try to investigate what caused the fire, it wasn't like someone, like an airplane flew over a forest and dropped hundreds of gallons of fuel and like lit a match or dropped a bomb. Oftentimes it's something as simple as an unextinguished cigarette butt, or something as simple as a match, or something as simple as a small campfire that can send hundreds of thousands of hectares and acres of forest into flames. And not only is it tragic, but it's also dangerous and destructive. And what James is saying, the tongue, like the bit in the horse's mouth, the tongue, like the rudder, the tongue is like a small spark that can start a mighty fire. Now, what happens when a fire gets out of control? What happens when you're home cooking and all of a sudden something goes on fire, or you're outside like the barbecue? Like, what happens when all of a sudden you're faced with the reality of fire? Well, you have two choices. The first option is you can try to contain it. You can try to control it. I remember many years ago, I got invited by someone in our church to go to their house on a Sunday after church because they were going to do a barbecue. And so I'm sitting there, and I'm kind of half Brazilian, right? My wife's Brazilian, so I've kind of come to learn the incredibly powerful arts of the barbecue and what it really means to do a churrasco properly. And so I'm sitting there and I'm observing, but I'm choosing not to say anything, but to allow the person to do their thing. And so what happened was they had bought slow-burning charcoal. You know, slow-burning charcoal, you start lighting it today, and then like 7 days from now, it's ready to cook. Like it smokes and smokes and smokes and smokes and smokes forever and ever. So it wasn't really getting going. So this person was feeling embarrassed that we were waiting. So he decided that the best thing to do was to throw petrol on the barbecue to try speed up the process, right? I mean, seems very logical. So he went over, opened the petrol can, and just started to douse this fire with petrol. But of course, the desired effect was achieved in that the whole thing went boom. There was like a 20-foot flame. Like I'm sure the astronauts in space could see this barbecue being lit. It was so big. But as soon as it hit there, it also started to climb the liquid back to the petrol can, and then boom, the petrol can's on fire. Then boom, he's on fire. Then boom, the whole garden's on fire. It's like Armageddon. Like the whole world is burning. And we're all freaking out, grabbing kids, stop, drop, roll, trying to find water, sand, something to extinguish this fire. Eventually, after like 10 minutes, we got all the fire out, and we weren't able to cook any sausages. It was quite tragic. The point is, it's very difficult to contain a fire. It's very difficult to try to manipulate and control a thing. The best option we have is that rather than containing it, to extinguish it, to put it out. To put it out quickly, to put it out immediately, to put it out almost at its source. Why? Because if we don't, it may spread, it may grow, and it may destroy things that matter most to us. Now, when it comes to explaining, oftentimes when we find ourselves explaining why we said what we said, or why we should be let off the hook for what we said, explaining feels like containing. It feels like we're kind of trying to keep this thing in check and making sure. But actually, explaining is fueling the spreading. You know it. You know what it's like when you say something you're wrong, and you're like, oh, I didn't mean it. I was just joking. I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm sorry. And the other person's clearly still upset. We're like, what's wrong with you? Like all of a sudden, it's like, I'm the one with whom the wrong is with, but I'm asking you what's wrong with you. And it's like, I didn't mean it. I just had a tough day. I was impatient. I hadn't had dinner yet. I mean, my team lost last week. I mean, the planets are misaligned. Gravity's quite off. I haven't had my zinc vitamin today. I mean, my left earlobes are hanging a bit longer than the right earlobe. Like, I forgot to wear my right sock. Like, we explain. But rather than containing, what our explaining is doing is breathing oxygen on this fire. And all of a sudden, what began as like a simple, stupid moment becomes a colossal, global, life-threatening fire. The bottom line is, don't explain in an attempt to contain, because that will only increase the pain. Don't explain in an attempt to contain, because that will only increase the pain. James says in the last verse 6, the tongue is also a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body and sets the whole course, there's direction, the whole course of one's life on fire, and it is itself set on fire by hell. Meaning there's a part of us that is so broken and so corrupted and so out of whack, no amount of self-serving or self-help can align or fix. We can't be disciplined. Our religion can't mold us into good people. We need a transformation of the heart. Jesus said, from the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. And if we're not careful, the hell in our hearts, the hell in our minds will come out of the hell of our tongue, and it will make our whole lives hell. We don't have to die and go to hell. We can create hell today in the world we live in if we don't get control of our mouths. If we win the battle of the mouth, it's almost like James saying, we begin to set a different course for the rest of our lives. So, if we shouldn't contain it and we should extinguish it, the question then becomes, how do we extinguish word fires? Well, what's the solution? What's the advice? I mean, we've come here today, so help me. Don't just leave me hanging, depressed, going, oh my gosh, hell lives in my tongue. Like, what should we do? And the answer is simple, but you're not going to like it. And you know how you're not going to like it? Because I don't like it. Because it's tough and challenging, and it makes us feel exposed and vulnerable. How do we extinguish word fire? It's very simple. One word: humility. How do we extinguish word fires? Very simple: humility. Why is humility so important and so powerful? Well, first of all, watch this. Mean people, by definition, cannot act in humility. If you're a mean person doing mean things and saying mean things, then you can't be humble. Because you have to be a kind, sacrificial, unselfish person to be humble. Why is this? Because by definition, humility is responsibility. Humility isn't just like, oh, I'm so sorry, oh, forgive me. Oh, woe is me, I'm so humble. Oh, I'm the most humble person in the world. That's not humility. Humility is not whining like a sick cat. Humility is taking responsibility. See, explaining and excusing elevates me. Here's why you should know. Here's why you should appreciate. Here's why you should accept my apology and we should move on. I'm explaining and I'm excusing, and as I do, I'm elevating myself. But humility elevates you. Humility says, I recognize that I've caused you pain. I've recognized that what I said was unwise, and it was selfish, and it was hurtful. I recognize that I am the one in the wrong, and I want to take responsibility. I want to take responsibility for the hurt I've caused. I want to take responsibility for the words I've said. I want to take responsibility. Humility elevates the other person. So that's what humility looks like. What does humility sound like? How do we extinguish word fires? Very, very simple. Here's the answer. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Say it with me. 1, 2, 3. I'm so sorry. Let's say it with more conviction. Come on. 1, 2, 3. I'm so sorry. Ars Gaeilge, tá brón orm. With me. 1, 2, 3. Tá brón orm. I love this because the word brón literally means grieving or sad. I am so sad for the pain I have caused you. Now the question is, I'm so sorry, tá brón orm. Which part of this sentence is the most powerful, most poignant, and most important part of the sentence? Is it I'm? Is it so? Or is it sorry? And the answer is none of those. The most powerful part of the sentence, tá brón orm, or I'm so sorry, is the full stop. I'm so sorry. I mean it. I take responsibility. I humble myself. I recognize and I take responsibility. And then I shut my mouth. This is life-changing stuff. Then you shut up. Close your mouth. Stop talking. Stop explaining. Stop rationalizing. Stop excusing. Just say it like you mean it. And then just stop. Just stop. And don't tell them how bad you feel. Because you're the bad guy or the bad woman. You're the bad person story. By you trying to tell them about you feel, you're demanding sympathy. And the bottom line is, you don't deserve it. Because you're the one in the wrong. And don't ask for a hug. Because by asking for a hug, you're demanding proximity. And the last time I checked, when someone hurts us, we try to get away from those people. And even though a person may love you, sometimes have to tolerate you because of your selfishness. You don't deserve that proximity. And here's a very difficult one. And don't ask for forgiveness. Don't try to force people into an obligatory situation where they feel like, well, Jesus said you have to forgive me. Come on now, we're Christians. It's what you're supposed to do. Listen to me. Forgiveness is a gift. It cannot be demanded. And it cannot be earned. And we have no right to ask for sympathy, proximity, or to make something as powerful and as important as forgiveness obligatory. All we can do, I'm so sorry. Stop. Tabron Aram. Stop. And then we leave the other person. We empower the other party at their pace, at their good leisure, according to how they feel. They will decide if and when to forgive us, to hug us, and to sympathize with us. We don't have the right to demand from people when we're the ones that have caused the wrong. And again, parents, is very important. When your child is 2 or 3, as my son turned 3 Friday, today's Sunday, it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, oh, boo-boo, whatever. But as your children grow and as they become adults themselves, you can't make them respond to you. If you screwed up as a parent, but I've said this 1,000 times, as parents, we should not just ask our kids, or model our kids, how important it is that they apologize to us, but we should model humility to them by apologizing to them. When we get it wrong, there's nothing more powerful as a parent than getting down on a knee and looking our kids in the eye and saying, I'm so sorry. I shouldn't have reacted like that. I should have said those words. I shouldn't have spoken to your mother like that. Like, I hold myself to a better standard, and we all stumble in so many ways. But the love of Christ in me compels me to love others as he has loved me. I'm so sorry. But when we do that, we shouldn't try to manipulate our kids into responding to make us feel better. If we hurt them, we should treat them with dignity and allow them and afford them the same grace and space that we'd afford a friend, a colleague, a sibling, or a spouse. We can't demand sympathy. We can't demand proximity. And we can't make something as powerful as forgiveness obligatory. Bottom line is, mean people say mean things. And we've learned a lot about what we should do about the mean people out there. But as we close the series, the application is what do we do with the mean person in here? And the answer is, this is precisely why Jesus came and died on the cross. Because we can't fix ourselves by ourselves of ourselves. We can't self-help our way or discipline our way into perfect behavior. We need a fundamental transformation of heart. Because when our hearts have been changed, our lives are changed. When our hearts have been changed, eventually our language changes. When our hearts are changed, everything about everything changes. The gospel doesn't make mean people nice. The gospel makes dead people alive. And when the love and grace and mercy and kindness of God, when the generosity of God lives within us through his Holy Spirit, what happens is that love, grace, mercy, generosity comes out of our mouths. Mean people say mean things, but mean people cannot act in humility. This is the standard. This is who we're called to be as Lighthouse Church. Again, if you're not a Jesus follower, this is just good advice. But if you're a Jesus follower, this is kind of like the command. This is who we're supposed to be. A voice of humility in our world. Words are weighty. And when it comes to the choice of containing it, when it comes to the battle of explaining, excusing it, let's not try to manipulate and try to make ourselves the hero. Let's just admit that we were wrong. And in humility, elevate the other person, and let's commit ourselves to extinguishing it whenever and wherever we can. And how do we do that one more time? We say, I'm sorry. 1, 2, 3. I'm sorry. When you say it and you mean it, it's incredibly vulnerable. Tabron Urim. And of course, one more time, the most important part is shut your mouth. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I did mean it. I wasn't joking. I was trying to hurt you. I was angry and upset. And you know what? I recognize it. I take responsibility. So I'm going to leave you now. I'm going to leave you with the responsibility that I own this. This is not good enough. You deserve better. I'm so sorry. That's it. And we trust that the other person, somehow in time, will find the grace and space to forgive us, to come back into proximity, and to understand what we're going through. Bottom line is, Jesus said, this is the gold standard, that we should do unto others what you would have others do unto you. We don't like when people explain. We don't like when people excuse. We know the feeling when someone's trying to get out of owning it. We feel valued. We feel people understand us when they're willing to take responsibility and in humility recognize our pain and own their mess. So as we close the series today, that's what I want to pray for you for. That's what I want to pray for me for. I want to pray for us that one of the kind of clear distinctives of what the world see in us is a humility, not only evident in how we walk and how we serve, but also in how we speak. Perhaps one of the best ways of knowing a true Jesus follower is the level to which we're constantly saying sorry. Because we're going to screw up. That's guaranteed. But we are the people in the world that are always owning it, always recognizing it, always willing to take responsibility, and always in humility expressing our heartfelt sorrow for the pain that we cause. And not trying to manipulate or coerce or force people. We're a people who say sorry. We're not a mean people. We're the people of God. Amen.